So Lindsay, Vivian, you could go to the next slide. So Alensa and I in the next slide. So Alensa and I created this space for community, and the Tea Talks are a chance for us to explore together what these changes actually mean to us, and what residents who live in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and Hyde Park, and those who identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, what we really think when we hear and see about these changes. They are also for those individuals who aren't normally in the transportation world. I don't know what's happening tonight. So let me introduce you all to our organizers and presenters for the night. So as you all know, my name is Chevelle Olivier. I am the Executive Director of Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition, a health and wellness organization in Mattapan. And we have our 5 focus areas, which is food access and nutrition education, physical activity, youth development, built environment, and community empowerment. And I'll turn it over to Alensa to introduce herself.
Thanks, Shavella. And hi, everybody. I'm Alensa Michelle. I'm the founder and principal of Powerful Pathways. We are a planning and design agency that does our work through creative means using arts, media technology, and design thinking. And as the list is there, I won't go through it all. I am from Mattapan. I was born and raised here. A lot of my experiences growing up in the community has really inspired and is the backbone behind why I do the work that I do. And with that, I will pass it to Shavella.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shavella Lee Pacheco. I'm a Boston resident and native and co-founder of Consult Lela, which is a community consultant agency created to engage young people in planning processes.
And I will introduce Vivian, who some of you know very, very well. She is a 10-year resident of Mattapan and considers herself as a transportation nerd. She loves that the Mattapan trolley, the 24 bus, the Blue Hill Ave commuter rail are all walking distance from her home. But her favorite way to travel is along the Neponto River Greenway Trail, a 3-minute bike ride from her front door. A few years ago, she was featured on the bus and billboard campaign called I Bike Boston. She boarded a bus on Blue Hill Ave one afternoon, and the driver said, "Wait, are you that bike lady?" Hence the name of her business, That Bike Lady. It's really important for us to set the tone for our time together, and it's important for us to set those ground rules. And if you've been to a Tea Talk session, these are the same rules that we share with you all at the beginning of.
Got a little Peter. Where about? Down in Brookline.
One second. And as a reminder, if you are off mute, please put yourself on mute. So again, these sessions will be recorded. We will engage in a respectful dialogue. Submit your questions in the chat box while the presenters are presenting. If you are representing of an organization, making sure that you represent your organization well, and making sure that you're speaking for yourself and speaking from others. If you are a person that usually likes to speak a lot, step back. If you are a person that likes to speak little, try to speak up today, either in the chat or raising your hand. We want to make sure that we're practicing active listening. So many times we listen just to respond, but not listen to just really listen and take in the message. So make sure that you're practicing that active listening. And the last thing is that we want to leave room for open-mindedness. Too often we are quick to reject an idea because it doesn't serve us. While we go through this series, I want you all to think about others who don't have the same options of getting around the city as you. Lastly, we want you all to think about solutions. If you don't like the idea of something, ask yourself, what would you like to see instead? Sometimes we are giving the opportunity to speak up, to just suggest changes, but spend most of our energy and emotions on rejection. With this, we end up missing our opportunity to suggest changes that we want to see. And lastly, we want you all to be able to make informed decisions and informed opinions. And with that, our goals for tonight are for you all to, our goals for the Tea Talks series in general is to create safety solutions for our communities, understand the why behind the street change, having you all attend more community meetings, transportation related ones, becoming advocates for the community when it comes to transportation projects and what it is that you need, and understanding how transportation affects the community and your quality of life. Tonight, for our program, we'll start off with the history of Blue Hill Ave with Alyssa. Then we'll go into a high-level overview of what complete streets are with Shavella of Consult Lela. Afterward, we'll end with some Q&A and updates if time allows. So again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alyssa.
Thanks, Shavella. So I'm going to share my screen, everyone. Thanks, Vivian, for all the help with managing our technicals. Appreciate it. All right, so as I mentioned before, my name is Alyssa Michelle, and I'm with the Powerful Pathways. And for this evening, I'm going to present to you a little bit of information about the history of Blue Hill Avenue and some interesting images to help sort of understand some of its transition. So let's start with what's in a name. Well, why is Blue Hill Avenue called Blue Hill Avenue? Does anybody know why? Why don't we pop in the chat some responses? Why is Blue Hill Avenue called Blue Hill Avenue? The hills, yep. Awesome. So some of you have said the Blue Hills. That's actually right. Blue Hill Avenue is named after the Blue Hills. So now let me ask you, what does the naming of the Blue Hills as Blue Hills come from? Where did that origin happen? Someone said the native people that live here, very close. And there is a connection, right? So so hold on to the colonizers. Yeah. Okay. So all you all are like right on the money. So first is Blue Hill Avenue is named after the Blue Hills, and it's sort of a legend, but the documentation that goes is that when the colonizers were sailing the coastline on their way to what we now know as this area called the Boston area, they noticed that the Blue Hills kind of had a blue hue in a silhouette against the sun, and a lot of that had to do with the reflection coming off of the kind of stone rhyzobite that was coming from the area. But it looked like it had a blue silhouette, hence it got the name the Blue Hills. For someone who mentioned the indigenous people, yes, the Massachusetts is actually named after the Massachusetts tribe, and Massachusetts stands for People of the Hills, because in particular the tribe had gathered and lived in the hills. So that's the connection. So the Blue Hills is the main road connecting Boston to nearby towns, as it continues to do so today. Many of Boston's neighborhoods, like Mattapan, which was a part of Dorchester, the original name of this area actually was called Mattapan by the Native American people, which stands for a good place to sit or a good place to be. And when the settlers arrived in 1630, and they named this area Dorchester after the town of Dorset, which is a small town south of London, they decided to hold a part of the area to pay homage to its original name. But because the area was lush with land for raising cattle and growing orchards and fishing along the Neponset River, all of the sort of southern region all the way up to Canton was considered Mattapan. And in particular, Blue Hill Ave was the road that was built that connected settlers who were starting to build out into these smaller towns into Boston. And that was relatively the case up until the mid 1800s, when many of Boston's neighborhoods became annexed and therefore became a part of the city. So That's how Boston kind of began to grow the way it did, is because a lot of that identity that we still see present today is because these were their own towns. So why is it in particular when we talk about Blue Hill Avenue and sometimes we hear the 28 bus, like where did that come from? Well, that's actually because Blue Hill Ave covers part of Route 28, which is a major route that cuts through the entire state, as this image shows. All right, keeping it moving. Take a look here at some of the images. Above is a horse cart and buggy from the mid 1800s. As you can see here in the sign, it says Cambridge and Boston. So this was the way that transport took place for a very long time. And it was by horse cart and buggy. I'm picking up some feedback, so if you're on, if everyone could just get on mute. And then here on this side is an image of the construction of Park Street Station. After an extensive period during the mid to late 1800s was around the time that electricity was beginning to grow across all of the cities. Many of the cities were beginning to industrialize in what we now recognize as the Industrial Revolution. And as that was happening, it also prompted the construction of streetcars, and streetcars became so popular, particularly here in the Boston area, that there was this oversaturation of these transportation companies that were emerging. So in an attempt to consolidate them, the state established the predecessor to what we now know as the MBTA. And one of the first acts of that was to try to get some of these streetcars out of the street where they were causing a lot of congestion. And that's where the idea emerged to build an underground station. Therefore, meaning that the MBTA was actually the nation's first subway system. So moving forward, streetcars they became the prominent form of transportation by the early 1900s, and getting to and from not just different parts of Boston, but also surrounding cities and towns. Blue Hill Avenue, as I mentioned before, was a major connecting corridor, as it continues to be today. And if you take a look at this map here, this is a map from 1902. This is Blue Hill Avenue running along here. Some of you may recognize Franklin Field. It's now the Franklin Field projects and Harambee Park that's over here. And on this end is what would become Franklin Park. Here's another way to look at it. If we look at it here in this modern day Google map, that's how it looks. Okay, we'll keep it going, folks. So take a look at this image. This is what Blue Hill Avenue looked like in 1929. It was around this time that Mattapan and Lower Dorchester was becoming a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. At the time, this was how people boarded. There really was no, safety infrastructure, and folks would just board a trolley in this way. Anybody recognize this? Any local Mattapan folks recognize this? Well, this is actually the depot. I believe it was completed around 1867. I'll have to double check for that. I don't remember the date offhand, but this was the depot for the original Mattapan station. And it was yes, thank you, Fatima. It's the comfort station where people originally used to buy the trolley tickets to board the streetcars that connected from Mattapan that would go down Blue Hill all the way into downtown Boston. You might recognize it in this image as well. This is what it looks like. And this is what it looks like most recently today. So it's actually it should be a historical in the historical archives. It should be a national registry. But the comfort station is now being utilized as a restaurant adjacent to the new Mattapan station. You may not necessarily recognize this, this image, but this is actually a postcard of Mattapan Square from 1910. And this is Blue Hill Avenue. This is what we now know as a side of River Street. So here's what it looks like today. This is Mattapan Square in 1955. Here's another angle of Mattapan Square from 1955. This is the Oriental Theater. It's now a storage facility, but you might recognize it today. And if you look back here, some of you may recognize the top of St. Angeles, now known as Mount Carmel Church. And take a look at the cars here. And here's what it looks like today. So this is a storage facility of the former Oriental Theater. Some of the architecture and the interior is actually still preserved. And there's the top of St. Angeles / Mount Carmel Church. This is Blue Hill Avenue coming from at the intersection of Blue Hill and Columbia Road. So this is the entrance to Columbia Road. Some of you may recognize this building. Stashes is on the bottom floor here today, in present day. And this is, on this side is the entryway to Franklin Park Zoo. If you look here, there's the streetcar that's on its way up towards heading, which would then head towards downtown. And this is another streetcar that's going down Columbia Road, which is currently replaced by the MBTA bus Route 16. Oh, let me go back real quick. Here's another angle. There's the streetcar. This is part of Franklin Park. Some of you might see the sitting station that still exists today, where the bus stop is today. So this is what it looks like now. This was a synagogue. It's now a church. And there's the station and the bus shelter. This is a little further up on Blue Hill. Can anybody guess what this furniture store is now? Anybody recognize this spot right here? Close. It might be a church because, you know, there's a lot of churches. There are more churches per square mile in Mattapan than any other neighborhood. Oh, here is what it looks like. It's actually now the Family Dollar that's on Blue Hill.
Oh, wow.
This is another angle of Mattapan Square. This was one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this image is because one, you can see when the streetcars were removed, there used to be these electric poles that were along the median. And take a note of all the trees that also were along Mattapan Square. We don't have as many trees as we used to. And that's part of the reason why the neighborhood has a lot more heat spots, which are spots that have that tend to get hotter, that are literally hotter than other parts of the city because there are so few tree canopies, excuse me. So let me go back real quick. You notice these arches right here, and there they are still here today. So a lot has changed, but a lot has also really stayed the same. And here's finally the last image I wanted to share with you, which is what Mattapan Square looks like today. There's a lot of work to be done to improve and enhance the current road conditions. And the fact of the matter is, you know, I talk a lot about the streetcars. The streetcar that ran along Blue Hill Avenue, which was eventually replaced by the bus Route 28, was one of the last streetcars to be removed in the city, because much like the 28 bus today, it had the highest passenger rate than any other active route. So it was one of the very last routes to be of the street trolleys to be replaced and turned into a bus. So I'm going to pass it to Shavella in a quick second. So some things to think about as we go into the next stage of this workshop is, what are some things that you'd like to see changed about Blue Hill Avenue? Would you like to see wider sidewalks, shorter sidewalks, trees, lighting, a median or no median, a bus in the center or stay on the side, less traffic, more traffic? Some things to think about. So that's it. And here are some sources. So if you wanted to get some more information, I got a lot of these images from the Dorchester Historical Society and the Boston City Archives. There's also a couple of great websites called Times of Israel, which really kind of covers the history of the Jewish community in Boston and how they kind of left through a process of white flight. And bostonstreetcars.com is also a really great resource. So check out these links. We will provide this in the recording as well, and I'll pop this into the chat. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Lindsay. It's always a pleasure hearing you speak and just share the history. I always learn something new when I'm listening to you. So I'm excited to present next. And I will be doing a little bit more of an overview of the city. Oh, thank you, Angel. I'm not going to look in the chat too much. I do get distracted. So even when I ask questions, I am going to ask if you can come off of mute and just chime in. But this workshop that I'll be leading today, or my portion, is actually an adaptation of a youth workshop, our Complete Streets Deets workshop that Consult Lela leads. And so today we're going to be talking about what urban transportation planning is, Imagine Boston 2030, and Complete Streets. This is just for everyone to have a really basic understanding of what these terms are and what's being talked about. But before we do, I'm going to ask if just a couple people can come off of mute and check in and just say, what's your favorite way to travel the city and where do you like to travel the most? No, I have to look in the chat. Yes, feel free to drop it in the chat as well.
I like to cycle. I like to go anywhere I can cycle. So anywhere I can get on my bike and I can go, so the Mattapan Trail, Blue Hill Ave, anywhere I can cycle, anywhere that has a bike path, that's where I want to go.
All right, thank you.
Who was that? I need to have a conversation with you.
Yes, check in with Vivian Ortiz. I guess we're allowing a private chat right now. Thank you. Thank you, Born. So a few people have chimed in the chat too. I looked anyways. Thank you. Mattapan Trolley, definitely love the trolley. Foot and bike, walking around, love to walk around the city. Thank you. Just wanted to hear from different folks how we're getting around. I'm glad Alenta spoke about the history of Blue Hills in the beginning and just, paying homage to the land and who was here originally. And I think this is such an important piece to bring up as we're thinking about history. And I always say, go watch the first Talk if you have not, because Powerful Pathways definitely covers the history very well with Chevelle. But this map just outlines some of the different tribes that lived in the area. And if you look at the red lines, those are the trails, right? And so those are the ways that people got around. And it's very interesting because there are correlations to our current highway system. A lot of the ways that people were getting around originally by foot, by other ways, is how today we are now getting around. So I always like to point out back here from Western Mass, that's I-91. So just want to pay homage. Some of our goals are for participants to have just a basic transportation overview. So this is for people who do not have a transportation planning background, an awareness of transportation planning in Mattapan, and an understanding of how to be involved in current and future transportation planning. At the end, I will just show how to access the different projects on the city website. Just want to do a quick poll. What is transportation? And you can put this in the chat if you like. A, walking, B, driving, C, biking, D, public transportation, E, ferries, or F, all of the above. Thank you. So I see a lot of Fs, all of the above. That's exactly what transportation is. It's just how we're getting from one place or origin to another destination is taking a trip, and that's the term that's used. It can be walking, biking, driving, skateboarding, scooter, transporting in a wheelchair. It's just how are you getting from one place to the next. And so we're also talking about urban planning because we'll mention in part 2 just the larger projects and planning processes that are happening. So I just want to make sure that this term is defined. Urban planning is just how we prepare for the cities, for the future in cities by creating policies that foster opportunities for all and projects in the built environment, in our infrastructure, and what our homes look like, our school systems, our businesses, our economy, and how people are being able to take trips between those places, medical systems that help us meet the needs of people now and in the future. And we know that we have to plan for a lot. That's unprecedented. And so urban transportation planning is the development of policies and projects to address the existing and future mobility needs of people of all ages and abilities. And so we just want to outline what kinds of things transportation planners do. They create networks. So within it, they create networks to enable people to get where they need to go. So think of bike paths, bus paths, right, bus trips, and making sure that people are getting in the places they need to in a safe, efficient, and predictable manner. Those are some things that are very important that will come up later as well. They create networks and systems to enable people to deliver goods in a safe, efficient, and predictable manner. A lot more than just us, right? People going to work and going to school is what's being transported. There's food that's on the streets, there's fuel, there's waste, there's compost. Yeah, very exciting. And transportation planners also engage the community in discussion about how do we use the space on our streets with the understanding that streets are public spaces for everyone. And they often revolve around street design. So deciding how much space, and literally space, in terms of feet, for people to travel using various modes of transportation and thinking about all of the ways that people are getting around different modes. And for amenities such as bus stops, benches, and street trees. So I can stop for questions now and ask if there's anything anyone wanted to clarify, or I can also just check the chat now. Wait a couple of seconds.
There aren't any questions in the chat right now, Shabella, so.
Okay, I know we have quite a few experienced people. So I will move on. And feel free at any point though to type in the chat. I will have a few opportunities where I'm stopping for questions. So I would like to hear from some people just about transportation planning in your neighborhood. What's one example of transportation planning that you have seen in your community or in the city? You can come off of mute or type in the chat. Let's see, Carlene said the commuter rail. I'm curious what you mean by commuter rail. Speed bumps, bus only lane. Yes, commuter rail is an example of transportation planning. Additional rail stops in the city. Yes, that's definitely something that is happening, and there are many projects happening. Ashley, you can come off of mute. I see you have your hand raised. You can come off of mute if you would like.
Hi, I was born in Mattapan and raised in Roxbury, and this may be a little bit more, it's maybe an unpopular opinion, but I feel like there hasn't been much planning. And I think that's one of the things that we have lacked, for quite some time. And then recently with the changes that have happened with transportation and everything, some of the things that people have mentioned, it still doesn't seem like planning because I feel like ease of mobility has decreased. That's all.
Mhm. Well, I will say that I think the biggest room in the house is room for improvement, and in terms of planning our future and what that looks like transportation wise, housing wise, food wise, we really need to plan a lot more intentionally and collaboratively and genuinely. So I do appreciate what you're saying. Thank you. So I'm going to move on, and I think what you're seeing in Roxbury, it's the same across the city. So I'm just going to highlight some of the transportation agencies and how they are interlinked. MassDOT is the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, and they are the large umbrella, our state agency, and the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And they are in charge and mainly take care of our highways, bridges, overpasses, and DCR, the Department of Conservation and Reservation Parkways. The MBTA is one branch underneath this umbrella, and that's the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority that controls our buses, subways, and trolleys, commuter rails, and ferries. And that is our public transportation. And there's also the Boston Transportation Department and Department of Public Works. And those are specifically our Boston agencies. Of course, there are many throughout the city that correlate with their throughout the state that are in different cities and towns. And some of the things that Boston Transportation Department is leading are the Blue Bikes movement, Go Boston 2030, which is a plan we'll speak about, street design, and parking management. So I just want to highlight Imagine Boston 2030. This actually might come back to what you said, Ashley, just about the plan that is, or how that plan is happening. Imagine Boston 2030 is the city's master plan, which is how they came together over a course of about 2 years of community engagement to see what the city should look like, to determine what the city should look like by 2030. And these were 5 of the goals that came out of that project or that visioning process. So encouraging affordability. Of course, I'm not in the space right now to judge how well these things are happening. I just want to share this information. So encouraging affordability, reducing displacement, and improving quality of life. And the plan that goes with that, you can see underlined there. Driving inclusive economic growth, which is something that the city has been making impressive movements towards recently. Promoting a healthy environment and preparing for climate change. So thinking about climate ready Boston and some of the aspects that even transportation planning is related to. Increasing access to opportunity, reducing the racial wealth gap that a lot of us are so very well aware of. The average white household in Boston has an average wealth of about $250,000, and the average Black household has about $8. So really the focus is on education. And then an investment in open space, arts and culture, transportation and infrastructure, which is what we are speaking about today. And next week, we'll touch on a little bit more. So Go Boston 2030 is the city's transportation plan that highlights the policies and projects to help us create a 21st century transportation system. Their aspirational targets are to improve safety, to expand access, ensure reliability, increase the affordability, reduce car use, and reduce emissions. So I think these are some things that are really important to have at the table when at transportation, having conversations about transportation in the city, just because these are some of the aspirational targets. again, related to in terms of reducing car use, climate change, and reducing emissions. So complete streets are streets that have space for all modes of transportation and that are also comfortable as public spaces. And these are called complete streets. So making sure that our streets are not, and again, watching some of the transportation, the T-Talks that Chevelle and Alenza have put together. There are 7 previous, there's so much history and so much great information in there, and so much great perspective. But this is what the, these are national guidelines. So this is something that's not just happening in Boston, but across the country. Complete streets are guidelines that are being implemented to think more wholly about our streets and how humans are getting around. So there in Boston, we have 3 main themes, I should say. And I just want folks to hop in the chat. Just what comes to mind when you think about these? Multimodal, the streets are green and the streets are smart. Come in the chat, come off of mute.
I don't mean to be that person. I think that in certain areas of the city, they can be very beneficial. For instance, like the Seaport, it's a new neighborhood. Not a lot existed there before. And as a result, it's a better planned place. But then other parts of the city that necessarily wasn't as planned or planned as in detailed, some of the older parts of the city and stuff and everything, they can create issues, especially for motorists who are not from here or even bikers who are not from here, because it can create confusion and kind of slow down transportation or cause friction among, motorists and drivers and bikers and stuff like that. That's it.
That's fun. I mean, there are so many realities about transportation redesigns. I'm not here to sell transportation redesigns that happen once in a generation as the golden child. I just would like to bring some of why it's happening to the table. And I think, again, I completely hear you, Ashley. And I think if you watch some of I just have to ask if you've watched any of the other TikToks. Just because it is.
No, this is my first one and I'm very excited. I'm a native Bostonian, but I was gone for some time and I recently just moved back to the city.
Okay. Because there's so much history, right? And there is so much, just when we talk about environmental racism and redlining and the highway movement, like there's so much history when we talk about, and so much tension when we talk about transportation planning. And so this is just something where we're covering some of the basics of, how things are connected. So as people are coming to the table and to the conversation, you are just aware of what I think it's important to be aware of what the city's priorities are, their aspirational targets and their goals, some of the language that's being used, but also, who to come in contact with. I guess I should also, I'll show later on in the presentation, just where do you go on the website, when you want to make a comment about a project? Where do you go if something's happening and you want to figure out what's happening? But I really appreciate your input, and I do highly recommend that you watch, especially the first T-Talk. Watch the first T-Talk, and then if you want to watch more, okay, and if you don't, that's fine, the first one. Thank you, Chevelle. So I'll move forward. Yes, so with these three terms, multimodal, green, and smart, I want to ask, if there's anything in here that you see that fits with those terms. And you can come off of mute, or you can type it in the chat. Multimodal, and I'll put it in the chat actually, multimodal, green, and smart. So do you see those things highlighted in blue, and which one would you label which?
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Yes. I will give an example. So this is a tree. So this highlighted blue tree would fit in with the green theme. And we haven't yet defined what that is, but just to give some visuals for that. Born B. Kim said, multimodal is a complete street to me. Green space allows for motor vehicles and bicycle walkers to coexist. Smart works with environmental and elders. Absolutely. Multimodal is extremely important just in making sure we're not prioritizing just those who are driving. And because there's history with that, again, so in T-top 1, I want to asterisk. So this here is an example of being multimodal, right? It's for people who are different ages and different mobility needs to be able to get around. Interestingly enough, this is also, right, a different mode of using, not transportation, but a different way of using the street. This I love. I come from an environmental interest in this. I love the green space. So this is green. And for those, everyone has walked at some point. This past or last summer was so rainy. And there were these huge puddles around every, crossing space. That's because the surfaces are impermeable. So the water cannot get through and there's nowhere for it to drain and nowhere for it to go. So it pools in puddles. Having green infrastructure like plants and soil allows that water to go somewhere and pool somewhere. So it's not right there where people need to cross. Maybe someone needs to really get across and can't go in a different direction. So that's an example of green infrastructure. And then smart, there's a lot of wayfinding technology that's coming in Boston, or being constructed, and the real time for the MBTA buses, the solar panel real time where you no longer have to have a phone, there was a point in time, excuse me, I got really excited over this. There was a point in time where, only those who had a cell phone, a smartphone at that, could access an app to know when the bus was coming. And so the smart technology now makes it so that everyone, even, the elder who's waiting for their bus, and only has a flip phone, can know what time the next bus is coming. So these are just some things that complete streets are bringing along with, everything else. And so these are the complete streets guidelines. So streets are multimodal, they're designed for everyone. People who are walking of all ages and abilities, people who ride bikes, people who catch the bus or the train or the ferry, and people who drive as well. They are to make sure that our streets are safe and shared comfortably by all users. And I will say, while I know that there is tension in this conversation, in talking to young people who walk everywhere in the city, I have heard many complaints from them, and them wishing, that the streets were a little bit easier to cross. And so I do want to raise that as someone from Boston too. We don't like to stop people in the crosswalk unless you're on Columbus Ave, or some Columbus Ave. So the streets are also green. So as we're talking about healthy trees and plants and permeable surfaces to manage stormwater with Boston and climate change, we know that we'll have to deal with that. And making sure that someone mentioned the Southwest Quarter, that we have environmentally friendly, sustainable use of Boston street network. And lastly, they're smart. So they have the physical and digital information infrastructure required for all modes of transportation, including bike share and car share, and charging for electric vehicles would fit in that category, as well as some of the things we spoke about before. I am almost coming to an end, but there's just one last thing that I'd like to share before I then go show how to get to figure out what's happening and how you can be a part of that. There are different street types that Complete Streets guidelines will have rules for, I'd say, or how they'll determine how they'll be redesigned. Streets serve different purposes, and accommodating all modes can look different depending on the street type. So major corridors or connector streets, Blue Hill Ave is one, Cummins Highway, Columbus Ave, Hyde Park Ave. Those are all major connector streets. They have the wide double yellow center lanes, bus stops, traffic signals, and incoming dedicated bike facilities. Neighborhood streets are, residential streets where people live. There's usually the homes on, thinking about where I live in Hyde Park, a lot of single family and triple family homes, triple deckers. Those streets are slower, they're supposed to be. There's usually no center line, no real indication of, where you need to be. And bike lanes are not needed. They say, I live near a skate park though, and I do cringe seeing kids ride down there. But the designs happen based on the different street types. So a major corridor would get a road diet, which we'll talk about next week. Protected bike lanes. So all of these specifics we'll talk about next week of what they can look like and what is possible. There are also dedicated bike lanes on a major corridor and designed for 25 miles per hour or less. So that's part of the road diet is also the traffic calming measure. Neighborhood streets can have speed humps or raised crosswalks and are designed for 20 miles per hour or less. So I'm gonna stop and ask for questions before I get to my last two slides. Okay, I'm looking in the chat. Thank you, Jalen Blake. I highly recommend you watch some of the other ones. All right, so I'm gonna.
How long is the T-Talk meeting?
We are actually, I'm just going to show how to get on to the city website and to access whatever project may be happening near you. And after that, if there are no questions, we can finish up. Let's say about 5 to 10 more minutes.
Shavella,
Okay,
I'm just gonna
thank
let
you.
you know, we are scheduled till 8 p.m., but if we end early, then we end early. So Shavella will continue doing what she's doing. We'll share some updates in time for you all to ask any other questions, and then we'll definitely finish up by 8 p.m.
Sorry, I skipped a part of the agenda. Yes, thank you, Shavella. Okay. So if there aren't any other questions, and if it's logistical, I might not be the right person. I'm going to share my screen again. So for those of you interested in you see that there's a lot happening in your area or on your way to somewhere that you're going. You're curious what's happening. You want to know how to find out. Everyone's online, so we can go to the website, boston.gov, which is our city website. If you want to take notes, now might be a time to just jot down a few in the list, if you have a list on your phone. Because you want to go to departments. Under the menu, you want to go to transportation because we're talking about the transportation department if it's street related. You can learn more about what the transportation department does, but you want to, and this is for active projects, like active projects. So these are projects that have already begun and are in some phase of the planning process. So there are two ways you can look at the map, which I just like to have available for people to see, because that's quite a lot that we have going on in this city. But there's also the projects by neighborhood. So I do want to ask if there's anything specific that, you know, someone doesn't live in Mattapan. I will show how to get to Mattapan first. But if you want to type in the chat somewhere else that you live or a project that you've seen and are interested in, maybe it's a street, specific street. But since we're speaking about Mattapan, this is the planned Mattapan area that I'm highlighting. You can click there for more information, or you can look at projects by neighborhood, and they're in alphabetical order, and come down to Mattapan. Underneath Mattapan, it will show you all of the transportation projects that are currently happening. So there's the Blue Hill Avenue Transportation Action Plan, Blue Bikes Expansion, the Cummins Highway project, Fairmount Line Service Enhancements. Someone spoke about the commuter rail, neighborhood slow streets. That's a good program. And Plan Mattapan, which is a larger project through the Boston Planning and Development Agency. Is there any specific project or neighborhood that someone wants to look at? I haven't heard from anyone.
Shavella, can you open like one of the projects in Mattapan just to kind of see a little bit more? So once you go on to a particular project, what does that look like?
Thank you, Vivian. I can definitely do that. So I'll bring everyone to the Blue Hill Ave Transportation Action Plan project because that is the best way to then get involved, right, and figure out what's happening. So thank you for bringing me to this one first. You can see all the information about this project. So every single link will have this information. What's the mission, the project area, mission, the project area. So there's currently a, sorry everyone. There's currently a redesign of Blue Hill Avenue that is beginning. The planning process has begun. And it is from Mattapan Square to Grove Hall. Pretty much everywhere that Blue Hill Ave is 2 lanes. Shows what the project focus is, transportation, safety, and you can look more into those as well. Public space and resiliency will show upcoming events, the timeline, so things that have already occurred. So it will have the meetings as well. So if you are interested in catching up, you want to join something, or if you just, decide to join, that's also fine. But if you're interested in seeing what conversations have already happened, you can look at those. I believe they are recorded. Is that true, Vivian? That's okay. I'm only asking because you're the only person on camera.
Which is something that I don't quite understand why. I want to be able to see faces, so maybe
it's okay. And then there'll be some more information. They'll show related projects. So Blue Hill Ave is not happening right independently. Cummins Highway is a part of that. There's the bus program. Another awesome thing that is happening in conjunction with this project. So that is what you can find in each of the links. And let me move this out the way. If you want to, stay involved, you want to know when the next meeting is, you can send an email to this email, or you can sign up to get project updates. You can put in your email address and your zip code. Each individual project has its own email and sign up. So if you're more interested in Cummins, or you want to know about what's happening on Cummins Highway as well, then you should sign up for both of those updates. If anyone wants to, I'll do the last call for if anyone wants to see their neighborhood.
I'd like to see Fenway area.
Okay.
I'm interested in the parking.
Okay.
I know that this is going to increase a lot of volume in a lot of different areas, but I haven't heard much about the parking situation for so that businesses can be, effective people that need to be able to park, as well as the public transportation.
Parking, I will say, is a conversation that comes with transportation planning across the city, and I'm guessing beyond. Part of and this is why I think it's important to highlight what the city's aspirational targets are, is reducing car use by like 50%. I pulled that, I can pull that back up. And so in part of those goals of encouraging other ways of getting around is having space for these other ways, having to reprioritize the space. So in our next meeting next week, we'll actually talk about how wide is the street, and what are the different options that can actually be done, and what does that look like? And it's definitely drastically different from what we see now, but there are some different options in different ways that things can happen. But parking is, I don't know what's happening around the parking conversation in Fenway specifically. But these are the 3 projects that are happening there. I guess I just wanted to say that about parking.
Do you think that's realistic with the rise of usage of electric vehicles, making things more cost effective, that people will be using the automobiles less when it's more economical with the electric vehicle?
I have a lot of thoughts. I feel like I tried to be very unbiased in this presentation. There's just so many things that I think more people need to be a part of the conversation of what do these solutions look like, because there's so many things that we're not thinking about. And there's so many things that professionals do know and that have been talked about. But I just think that we have to.
I'll jump in, Shavella. Let me see if I can. Electric vehicles are going to be, definitely they're coming, they're here, but they're not necessarily going to be affordable for all of the populations immediately. So we need to continue looking at other forms of transportation. So making sure that we have improved our public transportation system. Folks that want to use other spaces are able to do those safely. And so how electric vehicles are going to be stored, those are conversations that are going to be happening. But right now, what we're looking at is like, what are the existing ways that we would like to promote folks to be using the space differently? And then that the different types of car use will also be part of that conversation. But I would suggest on this Fenway project, why don't you sign up for all 3 of those? And then that way you can kind of keep tabs as to what's happening. And when that parking situation or that parking conversation takes place, I can tell you that in Mattapan, a lot of the conversations that are taking place along Cummins Highway as well as Blue Hill Ave are very topic specific. So in order to not overwhelm everyone with everything under the sun, it's this time we're talking about like folks with mobility concerns, the trees and bus stops and things like that. So you might just try that out and see if there's a, and get on there and ask questions to the folks that are planning that project specifically about parking.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you so much for all those wonderful questions. And thank you, Shavella, for sharing that overview of Complete Streets and showing folks how to get onto the City of Boston's website. I do want to say that all the questions that you all asked, these are perspectives of ours and not in a perspective of anyone else's. So as Vivian mentioned, if you want more information about anything particular, please go to the City of Boston's website and sign up for that particular project and attend those community meetings there to have a more live and intense discussion about those projects. Vivian, would you mind just pulling up your screen? But I don't think we need to. I think the next part is our community Q&A, which we have already started. And then Carlene asked us a question about basically like, who are we? Like, who am I? Who is Alensa? Who is Shavella? Who is Vivian? How did the Tea Talk start? And then like, who do we work for? And I love that question. So I'll go ahead and answer that first. So again, my name is Chevelle. I'm a Mattapan resident. I live with my dad off of Mamelon Circle. And I've been here for about 18 years now. And I became involved in the Mattapan community when I joined Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition at the age of 17. And there I met Vivian, Alensa, and all the wonderful other people. If you go to our website, you'll see them. And I co-founded an event called Mattapan on Wheels when I was 18. And that was my first taste of what transportation was. And at that point, I thought, bike riding was just bike riding, having fun. But through planning that event, I learned that people do this on for their day job. Like they advocate for bike lanes, they advocate for biking in different ways to get around. And then after that, I soon discovered that transportation was more than just driving, as well as more than just public transit, and that transportation is just any way that you get around, and that it's more important to focus on other modes of transportation other than just driving. We got some support through Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition from Brigham Women's Hospital to do some digging around psychological first aid. So that's like trauma and things like that, but that's a huge topic. That's a huge thing. And so I wanted to figure out, how do I make that connection between biking, something that I have been exploring, and mental well-being or emotional well-being. And I didn't know where to start. And so I was just thinking, and I was like, okay, how about I do some type of workshop? But I didn't know what type of workshop, what should that content of that workshop be? But I knew there were others who had that knowledge and that resource. So I called up my girl Alensa, because as you all know, she dropped all that knowledge earlier. So I called her up, and there was another young woman, her name is Michelle Cook. And together we came up with the Transportation Talk series. And we've been doing these talk series since October of 2020. So who do I work for? Although I work for Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition, which started as a volunteer-based organization of Mattapan residents and Hyde Park residents who really were concerned about the health and wellness of Mattapan. So although I work for them now, we've been volunteer-based for about 13 years. And I've been with the coalition for 17 years, and I live in Mattapan. I like to say that I'm a Mattapan resident first. So I work for myself, and then I work for the community before anything else. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Shavella, Vivian, or Alensa to share more about themselves and their perspective of how the Tea Talk started for them.
I can jump in. So thanks for that question. I think it was Carlene who asked that question, and others. So it's great to see a lot of new folks on this Tea Talk. So as Savella said, we started this because we shared similar interests. We're both from the community. For me, I'm the founder and principal of Powerful Pathways. As I mentioned before, it's my own organization that I started after working in the nonprofit sector and in local government for several years. I wanted to create an organization that really delved into issues of community development that had where we had a deeper understanding around community organizing and social and racial equity. And so since 2017, Powerful Pathways, at Powerful Pathways, we would put on what we called Powerful Talks. So we would on occasion invite guest speakers and do panels and webinars and workshops on different topics. So when Chevelle reached out to me and said, I want to do a tea talk on that engages community members, like a series of workshops that engages communities on transportation projects, I was like, absolutely, because I love doing that stuff. And we just went it from there. And at different points in time, we've had different speakers. As you can see, we've collaborated with Vivian and Shavella, and we have different people that we collaborate with for the different series. You can check all of that out on YouTube in the link that Shavella popped into the chat. The Tea Talks have been going on since the fall of 2020, I believe. So we have quite a few running series. We're also down to do more. It's all dependent upon if the capacity and time we have and the resources available. But the intent and behind the Tea Talks has always been to inform the community and to help inspire people to take action with a focus on Mattapan, Dorchester, and Roxbury, to hope that you will take action and that the tools and the information that we provide you allows you to be better engaged in these processes. So anything you want to add, Vivian, Shavella?
I guess I can just introduce myself a little bit better than I did at the beginning. So I am, have worked with Mattapan Food Fitness Coalition in the past and met Alensa and Chevelle through there. I actually have a background in food systems and youth development. So that's where my perspective in this work comes from, bringing young people into the conversations, these larger conversations that we're having about the world. So much of what we know now, what we see, what we're living in, is the vision of a very small demographic of people. And so Chevelle and I together founded Consult Lela, and really bringing young people to the table when it comes to envisioning the future. As we are seeing across the country and across the world, young people are really driving a lot of the change that's happening, although it's happening in many ways as well. And so we are focused on community engagement for those under 21 in transportation planning processes.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen because it's a little hard for me. So my name is Vivian, and about 8 years ago, I was really interested. First of all, I moved to the East Coast. I'm originally from El Paso, Texas, where everything I did was drive. And then I moved to the East Coast and moved to New York City first. And then I went to Boston and just decided I wanted to continue living a car-free life, just to kind of help myself, to help the planet. And I was really scared to drive in Boston because it was not exactly the way that I was used to driving. So 8 years ago, I got interested in riding a bicycle, and I attended the City of Boston's Women's Learn to Ride Clinic, which is happening right now as we speak in the Mildred Avenue parking lot. And I fell in love with it. And I remember Chevelle and I both got bikes that were gifted to us from Vivian Morris, and I fell in love with it. And since that point, it's really become my main form of transportation. But living in Mattapan and realizing that I did not feel safe necessarily getting out onto the street, I started attending public meetings that related to transportation just to kind of get an idea of what was happening. And I would go throughout the city, and oftentimes people would be like, why are you here? You don't live here. And I said, I want to be able to get here by bike and to be able to encourage folks to be able to bike. I'm very, very fortunate that the Neponset Greenway Trail is definitely, it's right behind my house. So I have a very safe space to be able to leave my home, but eventually at some point I have to get off of that path and get onto the street. So since my bike journey started, I have become a league cycling instructor, so I can teach people how to ride on the street. I can teach people how to ride. And my way of thinking is that we all have the choice that we can make on how it is that we want to travel. Some of us are very multimodal, so we get around in different ways. And we just need to be able to have folks have the opportunity to be able to travel in those spaces safely, okay? My daytime job is with the Massachusetts Safe Routes to School program, which is a program which is federally funded and it takes place throughout the country. We have a statewide program in Massachusetts that works with kindergartners to 8th grade students that teach them how to use the crosswalk, how to be able to make sure that your bike is ready to go where it needs to go. And I'm working really hard to make sure that we have that program and those opportunities for our students in Mattapan and in Boston. So much of the transportation mode in Boston, and understandably so, because not all of our students attend schools in their neighborhoods, relate to busing. But we have students that have to walk to that bus. We have students that ride their bikes during the summer and other things like that. So I see a lot of friends and names here. There are a lot of us that are in this space, and I would love for you guys that are working in this space to turn on your cameras so that people can see that there are other people that look like us that are working in this field, okay? So when we deserve to be able to have those safe spaces like other neighborhoods do, we work closely with the city. We are 4 consultants that are getting paid to do outreach differently in our community related to Blue Hill Ave, so that we can have those conversations. In meetings, there's always somebody that comes up and says, I really agree with this project, but I'm afraid to say that because that is not the common voice that we hear in a lot of these settings. So we are going to continue having these conversations. We are going to be doing outreach activities along Blue Hill Ave. We encourage you to come. We encourage you to ask other people that are not in these spaces, because this is not the way they communicate. This is not the language that they speak, to bring them along, because we need to hear from a variety of voices, not just the folks that are just not 100% sure about this. Open our minds, look at the possibility, because we all know Mattapan Square is very messy for everyone to travel on, but we need to work together to come up with solutions for everyone and their mode of transportation. That was my tirade. We're going to be back next week to talk about other projects that are related to transportation that may not be necessarily on Blue Hill Ave. So look out for that information. We're going to have breakout groups, and we're going to be able to speak about projects that might be more of interest to you, or maybe something that you might not know about and you might be interested. And we're going to give you the resources on how to catch up to what those conversations are, because we oftentimes hear from folks, I didn't know, nobody told me. We're going to make sure to give you those resources. So from that point on, you will know what's happening and we can start thinking a little bit differently in our communities. Okay, that was for real. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Chevelle?
you, Vivian, Alensa, and Shavella. And I hope that from the short bios or introductions that we gave you all, that you all can see that we're very passionate at our core. Like, this is a community that we live in. And so we really want to make sure that we are giving you all the information so we all can advocate together for what it is that we want to see transportation wise. It could be even food wise, housing wise, just anything. But just a few events that's coming up, and then we'll end. Vivian, if you want to go back, we're having, I believe the first one is we're having our second part of the Tea Talk happening next week. We'll continue with another presentation from Shavella of Consult Lela on what complete streets are. And then, as Vivian mentioned, for Mattapan related projects that are happening in ways that you all can be involved. You can go to the next slide and I'll have Alensa share that if it's not about Mattapan on Wheels. It might be. Oh, okay. The next one is just about Mattapan on Wheels. Again, a bike ride that I co-founded when I was a young person, but just aimed to get more Black and Brown people on bikes and bring an awareness to the city that we need a safer infrastructure to do so. So that's happening on July 23rd. We will send a follow-up with links and things so that you all may be able to sign up for those. And then I'll have Alensa share something that's happening on her end.
Thanks. So we have, as Vivian mentioned, we're trying to build some more community engagement around these various activities, including what's happening in Mattapan Square and the soon to be happening along Blue Hill Avenue. So the way we want to do that is through various community building activities. So on Saturday, June 18, we're going to do a neighborhood walk. We'll be meeting at the Comfort Station, which is at the entrance to the Neponset Greenway Trail in Mattapan Square. It's going to be from 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. It'll be a nice opportunity to get your steps in. But the main goal of this activity is that we want to walk with residents to collect feedback about the conditions along Blue Hill Avenue, so that we can then submit that feedback to the city. So if you go to tinyurl.com /Mattapan BHA walk, you can sign up. It'll take you to a Google form. I'm going to pop it in the chat as well, but we'd love to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Vivian, you can stop sharing your screen. I'm gonna stop the record button, but thank you all so much for attending our 8th Tea Talk, Understanding Blue Hill Ave.